This is Nightly Business Report with Sue Herrera and Bill Griffin.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Nightly Business Report.
Every night we bring you the stories that impact business, the market news that you need to make smart decisions.
And tonight, with the market closed for President's Day, we're going to do something a little bit different and take a step back from the volatility on Wall Street and the political discord in Washington, D.C.
And since it is President's Day, we decided to take a look at how the market has performed under various administrations. And we enlisted Dominic Chu to dig up the numbers for us.
Markets have been on a roller coaster ride as of late. Now that it's roughly halfway through President Trump's four-year term, it may be a good time to take stock on how markets have performed through the years under various administrations. Since President Trump took office, the stock market is up double digits. Of course, that return is for a partial term, and there's no crystal ball on what the future holds for the rest of his term. Here are some, though, notable market returns under some other administrations. The best S&P 500 performance for a U.S. president came under Bill Clinton, whose two terms yielded a near 209% return on the S&P 500. President Barack Obama's two terms yielded a 166% return, and President Franklin D. Roosevelt got around 141% during a three-term span. Worth noting, though, that the gains in the Obama and FDR administrations came on the heels of bigger market losses that predated them. Meanwhile, the Depression-era administration of President Herbert Hoover produced around a 77% decline. So, what does the future hold for markets? While every administration's policies are unique, this time around it may depend a lot on developments out of Washington, D.C. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Dominic Chu.
So let's take a look back at American presidents to see which were good for the economy and the market. And we're joined to do that by Mike Santoli and Jeff Bush, a strategist with the Washington Update. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Appreciate it. I'm going to start with you, if I could, Jeff. You say that presidents can basically only bend the trajectory of the economy by setting up an environment that is more positive or negative for businesses and for investors and therefore the market as well, correct?
I believe so. The economy has a rhythm of its own, driven by much larger factors than any one president may control during their short tenure as president of the United States. And I think throughout modern history, say post-World War II, those trends have been demographics and innovation cycles.
Mike, Dominic Chu looked at the performance of the S&P. We're going to look at the Dow here. And of the modern presidents in the 20th and 21st centuries, Calvin Coolidge had the best performance during his time. He was lucky enough to be president during the roaring 20s. But then after Herbert Hoover's debacle, then you had Franklin Roosevelt, and his gains were 194%. Not too bad either. That was sort of backloaded because of the war, right?
Exactly right. I mean, if you consider the 12 years of FDR's terms, he did have a 9% annual gain in the Dow, which is about what the historical average is. But considering most of that was during the Great Depression, it's, I guess, a net positive. Calvin Coolidge is a great example, though, of the luck of timing, either good or bad luck of timing. You know, he came into office. His two terms exactly spanned the great years of the 20s after a bear market, after World War I. And then, of course, he gets out right before the 29 crash. Obviously, a business-friendly environment, too, so you can set a certain tone, but you can't really pick your moment necessarily in terms of where you are in the cycle.
And Jeff, Ronald Reagan's administration, you talked about innovation, and some would say his policies were innovative, but they created kind of a confidence level for businesses to take risk, and that resulted in a significant gain.
Absolutely. You know, Ronald Reagan was still riding the wave of demographics of the baby boom generation. Ronald Reagan came into effect when those baby boomers were hitting their prime earning years early in that cycle. So he had that tailwind behind him. And then he enhanced that by creating an environment of lower regulation, lower taxation, which gave those business owners confidence to then reinvest in their business. Capital expenditures break even were a lot shorter, and that gave them confidence to make those investments. Hence, investors followed that, prognosticating that the investments would do well over time.
And Mike, Bill Clinton, to some degree, also had the luck of the draw. He was president during the dot-com boom of the 90s, and that improved his performance as well, right?
Without a doubt. If you remember, of course, very famously, he came into office with the slogan of "It's the economy, stupid." While we were coming out of a shallow recession, it was a very frustratingly slow pace of growth when he started. One thing that did happen, though, while he was president, of course, he had a Republican Congress starting 2 years after he got into office, was the government budget went toward balance, and we had a very surprising, at the time, decline in inflation and interest rates. So all of that helped to foster this backdrop, of course, with the technology boom of higher equity values. And in fact, at the time, the longest economic expansion on record.
Jeff, you also gave us an example of how an administration and a president can dampen growth, and you point out George W. Bush's administration. I mean, timing is everything, but certainly some policies also played a role in that.
Without a doubt. George Bush was confronted with 9/11 and subsequently started 2 wars in the Middle East. At the same time, he also, seeing the projected surpluses in the federal deficit or in the federal debt, that he then reinvested that in a tax cut. And that tax cut, combined with the drain of the cost of the 2 wars, really put him at a disadvantage.
And Mike, it's too early to assess the Trump administration's impact on the stock market, but it has been, coming at the tail end of what has been the longest bull market in a long time here, but we've still seen tremendous volatility return, haven't we?
We've seen volatility, certainly, especially in the last year or so, although it's hard to really deny the fact that the election of President Trump did catalyze a burst of business confidence, and you saw the markets really dramatically reprice higher and basically get out of that kind of a little bit of a slow growth mindset that had set in before that. But he also took office, actually, when he was elected, the S&P 500 had basically been sideways for a year and a half. So there was a little bit of potential pent-up energy there. And you're absolutely right, though, in terms of not being able to make a final verdict 2 years in. 2 years into Ronald Reagan's term, the market actually had a big decline and only a partial rebound.
Jeff, what role, if any, do you think Congress plays in the economic success of a president and an administration?
Well, I think a great example of that would be the later part of George W. Bush's second term, when clearly Congress was trying to incent home ownership, home development, real estate development around the country. And of course, we know that added to dramatically the financial crisis we had in 2008.
Mm-hmm. On that note, gentlemen, thank you so much. Mike
you.
Santoli and Jeff Bush, who is with the Washington Update.
And it's also the time of year when people start filing their tax returns. And given that this is the first filing under the new tax laws, there are some things to keep in mind. Here's Sharon Epperson.
If you're used to getting a big refund, you may be in for a big surprise. Early numbers from the IRS for the first week of the tax filing season show the average refund down 8% from the same time last year. Sweeping changes brought about by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act have had a significant impact on many taxpayers. The new tax law nearly doubled the standard deduction to $12,000 for individuals and $24,000 for couples. So many may no longer want to itemize. Under the old tax law, an estimated 46 million taxpayers itemized their taxes, using a variety of deductions to lower their taxable income. Under the new tax code, that number is expected to drop to just 18 million because many widely used deductions were either capped or eliminated altogether. If you're worried about your tax bill, there is still time to get a break. You can put money in a traditional IRA or individual retirement account for 2018, up to $5,500 or $6,500 if you're 50 or older. And if you meet the income requirements, it will lower your taxable income dollar for dollar. You have until April 15th to make that contribution. And to avoid any tax surprises next year, do a paycheck checkup to make sure your company is withholding the right amount of federal taxes throughout the year. Grab your most recent pay stub and tax return, then use the IRS withholding calculator to check the amount is correct. If it's not, file a new W-4 form with your employer. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Sharon Epperson.
Douglas Bonaparth is with us now to talk more about the upcoming tax season and the biggest changes that you may experience. He is the financial advisor and president of Bonafide Wealth. Good to see you. Welcome.
Good to see you.
Happy President's Day. Much has been made about how refunds so far have been sharply below where they've been in the past, as if that was a bad thing. But it really means that taxpayers have not been overpaying as much as they did in the past, right?
Right. That's a good thing if you're not owing the government a tremendous amount of money. That's just your own money coming back to you. But it doesn't answer the question as to whether or not you're getting it right.
Mm-hmm. What about Sharon's point about adjusting your withholding? A lot of people basically do not understand the calculation. And even though you can go on the IRS website, it's kind of intimidating to do so. So how do you encourage your clients to make sure, I mean, obviously you're giving them advice, but the general public that may not know how to do it or may not even think they have to do it?
So I think 2018 is going to be a big test case, right? We have a lot of moving parts happening. So it's okay if you're not getting it right this time, but I want people to learn from what's happening here. With all these moving parts happening, if you're coming out by owing too much tax, you're going to want to take Sharon's advice and take a look at what you're withholding. I like working with professionals who have a really good understanding of what's going on here. It is, to your point, intimidating to look at all of these moving parts.
I mean, the W-4 is what people needed to go to last year.
Absolutely.
And make those adjustments in their deductions so that they didn't overpay or, if they could get that refund again.
So it's reactionary at this point if you're going to make those changes. That's why I want to use this year as a test case. But that form is going to allow you to basically mark down how many exemptions you can have. The more exemptions you put down, the less they're going to withhold from your taxes. So if you have a large number there and you end up owing a lot of money, that's going to be a problem. You might want to lower those exemptions, right? And vice versa.
The state and local tax deduction that was eliminated, it has hit a lot of high tax states like New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, but it hasn't hit all. How significant do you think that's going to be and as it plays out in this tax year?
I think it's a big part of the itemized deduction story. Okay, so for those who have been itemizing and have been itemizing well and above what that standard deduction is, that's going to hit. That's going to hit, especially in California, New York, New Jersey, to your point. So I think that's a big piece of the standard versus itemized story. You saw some interesting statistics put up there regarding that. That's what I have my eye on. And there's a number of other things that go into itemizing that were affected. And that's really where I think a lot of people, truthfully, are going to see that they maybe owe a little bit more tax than they were accustomed to in the year before.
And if people are not itemizing as much as they did in the past, what do you think that does to charitable deductions?
So I think it's going to have an impact across the board, especially when it comes to charitable deductions. However, I always say that if you're going to give because you want to, not because you want a tax deduction. So have that come from the heart, not from the pocket.
It sounds like we all have to be very organized this year.
That's the number one tip we could provide is don't react, be proactive, get help if you need it, get organized.
And don't be too upset if your refund isn't as big as it was last year.
Yeah, zero's the ticket, right?
Exactly. Thanks, Doug. Good to see you. Doug Bonoparth with Bonafide Wealth joining us tonight.
And speaking of expenses still ahead, a different way to pay for college.
America's total student loan debt is $1.6 trillion and rising. The average graduate coming out of school with upwards of $30,000 in debt. I'm Scott Cohn. We'll take you to one school that may have at least part of the answer to this crisis coming up on Nightly Business Report.
Time of year when high school seniors find out whether they've been accepted to the school of their choice. And if that isn't stressful enough, so is figuring out how to pay for it. With America's student loan debt soaring, some new alternatives are cropping up. Scott Cohn is in West Lafayette, Indiana.
Savannah Williams is an education major in her third year at Purdue University. She knew going in the math was not on her side.
I'm going to be a teacher and I won't make a whole lot of income in the future.
How to pay for her education without drowning in debt. Purdue offered an alternative. Instead of taking out loans, Savannah will pay a percentage of her income for 10 years after she graduates.
If I would have gone with a traditional loan, I would have had to pay it all off. Who knows how long that would have taken.
It's called an income sharing agreement, the latest attempt to tackle America's college debt crisis.
That crisis is massive, a $1.6 trillion drag on the economy, affecting people's ability to buy a home, buy a car, start a family for years after graduation.
Purdue's president says the program, now in its third year, shifts the risk away from the student.
Gives them certainty and some protection and safety. They're not going to have that much money borrowed piling up compound interest whether they're doing well or not.
If the graduate doesn't work, she doesn't pay. And if she does really well, her total payments are capped. 2017 graduate Charlotte Herbert, who got a job as a technical writer making about $32,000 a year, financed her senior year with the program.
I think it's a good balance between you have to pay for school and keeping people from decades and decades of unmanageable debt.
Purdue says it's the first four-year college to offer income sharing, but the concept is taking off elsewhere in higher education as well. In San Francisco, Austin Allred co-founded the Lambda School, which teaches computer coding, free up front in exchange for 17% of your income for 2 years if you make $50,000 a year.
If your job as a school is effectively promising a job, it doesn't make sense that a student pays you a bunch of money and it doesn't work out on the other side. Schools don't want to do that for obvious reasons.
It's too soon to tell if income sharing will be the way everyone pays for college in the future. The programs are unregulated so far, and they still leave graduates with an obligation, not that much different from student loans. But this is one way some schools are trying to bend the curve of the price of admission. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Scott Cohn in West Lafayette, Indiana.
And now to a story that really caught our attention. Did you ever log on to a website only to have to agree to a privacy policy before you can actually access it? Well, if you're like most Americans, you probably just click yes without ever reading it. And what you don't read may surprise you. Andrea Day explains.
Imagine your toothbrush spying on you, your coffee shop blabbing about what you search online, even your mattress listening in while you're in bed.
I think it falls into the category of creepy.
Your personal info could be scooped up by a company, even handed out to others, and you might not have a clue.
Consumers need to behave in a really paranoid way, where you assume that any company that can is probably going to collect information about you.
It all starts with this, a corporate privacy policy. You might not even read them and just click accept when you download or sign up.
These aren't negotiated agreements.
We sat down with 3 pros to find out what's really going on behind the policies. Privacy attorney Michael Kasdan, cybersecurity pro Brian Vecchi, and cyber specialist attorney Alex Urbelis.
How long does it take for you to digest an average policy?
Hours, at least hours.
Hours and hours to read, and he's an attorney.
I don't know if it's actually possible for somebody without a law degree.
They're written by lawyers for lawyers to protect the company.
A company that's hungry for your private information.
When you look at some of the data that these corporations are collecting, what do you think?
Why? We don't know what's happening there. But what we do know is that they find this very, very valuable.
We asked all 3 pros what policies they think raise some flags. For Urbelis, it's Philips Sonicare's Bluetooth toothbrush. It connects to an app to reveal brushing habits. In the policy, the personal data we collect may include your first name, username, profile picture, email address, gender, birthday, age, country, language, and password. And Philips may also work with third parties who process your personal data for their own purposes.
But it's up to you to find those other privacy policies that relate to these third parties and figure out what they're doing with your data.
Philips tells us they take data protection very seriously. The privacy notice is aimed at transparency on this point, as it describes in detail which data will be received by Philips, and Philips will only share their data with these independent third parties at the user's request. According to Kasdan, Starbucks collects loads of info that has nothing to do with serving coffee. The policy, the web pages you view, including the date and time, and the subject of the ads you click or scroll over. Kasdan says Starbucks then allows third parties to access that info. The policy. We have added certain features to our websites and mobile applications that allow social networks, such as Facebook, Twitter, to track the activities of their members.
Can you be 100% sure about everything that's been collected in most of these policies?
Not necessarily. I think that's not an accident.
Starbucks tells us the privacy of our customers is incredibly important to us, and we regularly evaluate all policies to make sure we're protecting their best interests. We strive to be transparent. We do not sell information to advertising companies. You'll also note that the terms of our policy provide customers options for choosing to share information with us. Vecchi flags the policy for Sleep Number's mattress. Last November, it was found to have permission to record audio while you sleep. The policy once said, we also may collect personal information, which may include audio in your room to detect snoring and similar sleep conditions.
The shocking thing was how it was buried in a privacy policy, not told right up front.
According to Sleep Number's products do not record audio. This was an error in our privacy policy, and we have since corrected this. So what can you do? The pros say read the policy before you click.
It is important to read because it does tell you what could be done with your data.
And while it may seem crazy to read something the pros say even they struggle with and that can change on a whim, the hope is if enough people look, anything dubious will come to light. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Andrea Day.
Coming up, spring training is underway, and tonight you'll meet an entrepreneur who turned his passion for baseball into a thriving business. Well, it may still be winter, but spring training is already underway for Major League Baseball players and for hundreds of teams in the Vintage Baseball Association who honor the game as it was played in the mid-19th century. That means finding vintage bats. And that's been no easy task. That is until a woodworker from outside Columbus, Ohio, founded a company that makes bats, not just for the vintage players, but also for the pros. Few appreciate the crack of the bat like Charlie Trudeau. A woodworker by trade, he joined the Ohio Village Muffins vintage team in the early 1990s. But their vintage bats literally cracked far too often.
They shouldn't have been breaking at all. I mean, it's not like we're facing 90-mile-an-hour fastballs.
The bats weren't made to be used, they were souvenirs. So teammates asked Trudeau if he could do better.
Some of the old bats were just enormous.
He studied pictures of the longer, heavier, and thicker bats from the mid-19th century.
The heavier the bat, they thought that was the better because the more mass you had, the harder you could hit the ball.
The wavy grains that add character to furniture can actually weaken a baseball bat.
This end.
Straighter grains, they make a better bat. His teammates were impressed.
Guys started going, hey, can you make me one? I want my own. Okay. And it just kind of grew somewhat organically.
Other vintage teams began buying Trudeau's bats, and Phoenix Bats, named for bringing back the vintage bat, became his full-time job. The buzz reached minor league pros in the Columbus area, so he made them modern bats, more weight in the barrel, with thinner handles to improve bat speed and power.
You want to get it through the strike zone fast and hard.
Naturally, he began to dream.
I was like, wouldn't this be cool if we could have bats in the big leagues?
Those minor leaguers then began reaching the majors in 2003. And all the while, Trudeau was upping his game.
Even those guys in rookie ball, they're different than everybody else. Changes as small as like a fraction of a millimeter off of the handle, they can feel it.
Trudeau stuck with the white ash to make his early bats, but he became an early adopter of the harder maple and then birch, which is in between.
Ash, birch, maple.
Phoenix customers have included Miguel Cabrera, the Triple Crown winner, and Ohio native Adam Eaton. By 2003, one of Trudeau's teammates, Joel Armbruster, became Phoenix employee #1.
I tell Charlie I regret it every day.
A year later, they went to Italy to buy a computer-driven lathe. It cost more than $200,000. It can cut and sand a bat every 2 minutes.
There's your finished product.
Phoenix makes about 20,000 bats a year, mostly priced between $50 and $150 each. Pros account for about 20% of the business. It's a made-to-order business with custom shapes and colors.
We want to be that high-end boutique bat company, all about quality, customer service.
But Trudeau is really more about bats.
Probably my downside was that I wasn't ever focused in on the business and the sales.
About 6 years ago, Trudeau left Armbruster in charge and happily went back to restoring houses, satisfied that his swings are indeed bringing some vintage joy to Mudville.
I was always, and always, probably always will be, a production guy.
You have witnessed a great game called baseball.
Well, Phoenix doesn't pay the pros, by the way, to use their bats, though it has been known to give them a discount. Now, everyone has heard of Louisville Slugger, of course, which was sold for more than $700 million a few years ago. But Armbruster believes that Phoenix Bats, with 10 full-time employees, now ranks among the top 10 bat makers right now. And again, you know, we're heading into baseball season.
Yep.
There's a lot of hope out there. And it was fun to watch some of those players using those mid-19th century vintage bats.
Absolutely
and
amazing.
Wearing the vintage outfits as well.
That's a great story.
Great fun.
Hope you enjoyed it like we did. That does it for this special edition of Nightly Business Report. I'm Sue Herrera. Thank you for watching.
And I'm Bill Griffith. Have a great evening, everybody. We'll see you again tomorrow.